COVID relief bill. There is something coming along, and that is a good thing. Should be Wednesday morning. Should be getting something passed through. That could happen. And look, I've been saying for a while, this is big. I know I've had a lot of people who have complained to me and gone, no, but we didn't get the $15. I'm going, yeah, I get that. I understand. Understand completely did not get the $15. Understand completely didn't get all of the things that we wanted. And look, there were most certainly things that I absolutely wanted to, without question. There were most certainly things that I wanted. And honestly, you're not going to ever get everything that you always want. So this is one of those moments where it's a huge win. We're talking major win here. And what's kind of frustrating is that, I still have some folks who, it's this weird moment where you got $1.9 trillion going to be spent on the poor and the working class. And it just kind of blows my mind when you stop and you think about it. Because I get this from people all the time. Rick, there's not much difference between the Democrats and the Republicans. They're all the same. And I go, this right here is one of those which side are you on kind of moments. It's one of those things where you go, which side are you on in this? You can be on the Trump side. I understand when they did their budget reconciliation bill back 2018, they gave $1.9 trillion to the very, very wealthy. Actually made them much wealthier. And it was one of these kind of these moments. Every Republican voted for giving rich people more money, giving massive tax breaks to the well-to-do and to corporate America. We have now a corporate tax rate down at 21%. I think the lowest that it's been at least in 100 years. And you look at this and you go, that's who was important to them. Now, this bill does some really great things. It gets money to the state and local governments. It gets money to individuals, $1,400 a head. And I know it's not perfect. It's not the $2,000. And I know we're better than that. I know we can do simple math. And I get the justification. We got the unemployment extension. You got the extra money for unemployment. Was it the $400? No. But it was something better than nothing. And understand the Republicans were giving nothing. And there's a ton of stuff in there. The fact that there's a pension bill in there to save the multi-employer pension funds, which all of those Trump-supporting union members who are in those funds, I got to wonder how they're feeling today, because there was no way the Republicans were ever going to vote for that bill. It was never going to happen. Never, never, never. Let me say it again. Never. It was never going to happen. The Butch-Lewis Act was never going to happen. And it was Joe Biden and the Democrats that put it into this bill. Why? Because do we want over 1 million seniors to go into poverty immediately? Of course not. So you had to act. And in a way the Republicans were not going to ever do. And they didn't. They had the chance to be involved in this legislation. They had a chance. Lisa Murkowski got something she wanted, and she didn't even vote for it. But for me, this is one of these weird moments, and it's that which side are you on moment. The old labor frame, which side of this equation are you on? All right. And I generally hate binary choices, but this is. Are you on the side of the Republicans and big money and big business and that, or are you on the side of the Democrats and the rest of us? Because that's what this bill does. To me, I'm looking at this and I'm going, we should be, maybe we've had way too bizarre of expectations. This thing's transformational. This is the first time in my lifetime where we've gone, no, we're going to help the people on the bottom. We're going to make sure the people who are hurting the most, struggling the most, the people who are at the bottom and slightly above, we're going to help them. This is that, which side are you on? Are you on the side of giving, the trickle-down supply side voodoo Reaganomic idea of we give the rich people all the money and they'll know what to do with it because they're smart? And I argue they are, and they do know what to do with it, and that is make more money for themselves. Not much helping everybody else. Now, there's some philanthropy. I'll give them that. Tax breaks they need. And then there's the other side, the FDR New Deal kind of side where we're going to help the working stiff. And as a consequence of helping the working stiff and helping the people who go and punch a clock every day and have to put food on the table and do all of the things that working families do, the rich are going to get richer too. And we're going to see this. We're going to see the economy heat up in the next several months, I think, in ways that we haven't seen in a while. There is going to be a good bit of spending. There's going to be a good bit of opportunity. And, I'm looking at this as really a transformational moment. A way to take back the idea that government can do the things that we need it to do. The things that we can't individually solve, but collectively we can. This is huge. We're at an incredible moment. And, for me, the next piece of legislation I'm hoping is a massive, massive infrastructure bill. As we talked about last night, something along the lines of $4 trillion to get people back to work, to move us into the 21st century and create just millions of good paying union jobs. Which brings me to today. Understand the COVID bill has moved it through its next hurdle. I guess Wednesday morning they are going to vote on it. It should be signed. It will be in place well before next Tuesday, the 14th, when everything takes a dive. This is good stuff, and there's a lot of good stuff in this that's going to help. And it's bipartisan outside of the Congress. You go into small town America, you go into those cities where you've got Republican mayors and you've got Republican governors and you got people who have to pay the bills. They're going, yeah, we need this. We're desperate. But today they began debating the PRO Act, the Protect the Right to Organize Act, which I think is one of the most important pieces of legislation in my lifetime. This, to me, is going to be, if they can get it through the Senate in one way, and understand it's going to be a Herculean leap. And look, I don't see Republicans coming on in any way, shape, or form. And this is where there's going to have to be some filibuster reform. If the Republicans, and this for me is the perfect scenario for this. This is that moment where you go, we're going to do away with the cloture vote of 60 votes. If you want to hold the floor and you want to debate and you want to argue this is the bill. I want to hear Republicans step forward and say why they are against unions, other than the fact that, and we know what the points are. The points are Democrats generally give money to Democrats. Union members generally give money to Democrats. That's it. That's why Republicans are against it, because there used to be pro-labor Republicans. I actually know a couple. There used to be. But corporate America has weeded them out. And, today Joe Biden tweeted out, quote, "I believe every worker deserves a free and fair choice to join a union, and the PRO Act will bring us closer to that reality." He says, "I urge Congress to send it to my desk so we can summon a new wave of worker power and create an economy that works for everyone." And I love the words. I love the fact that a sitting U.S. president has said, yes, we want workers to join and form unions. Yes, he has said it is the National Labor Relations Act and the board's responsibility to promote people to join and form unions. We want people to engage in collective bargaining. We want people to share in the wealth that their labor creates. We want that. We want to encourage it. First time in my life a president has said that while sitting in the office. That is why I voted for Joe Biden. That's why I voted for Joe Biden. And Tim Ryan on the floor of the House today. And it's one of those moments where, while Joe Biden's the reason I voted, what Joe Biden said is the reason I voted for him, what Tim Ryan said today is the reason that he's the reason that I'm a Democrat. And here's what Tim Ryan had to say.
Mr. Speaker, one of the earlier speakers said, this is the most dramatic change in labor law in 80 years. And I say, thank God. In the late 70s, a CEO made 35 times the worker. Today, it's 300 to 400 times the worker. And our friends on the other side running around with their hair on fire. Heaven forbid we pass something that's going to help the damn workers in the United States of America. Heaven forbid we tilt the balance that has been going in the wrong direction for 50 years. We talk about pensions, you complain. We talk about the minimum wage increase, you complain. We talk about giving them the right to organize, you complain. But if we were passing a tax cut here, you'd be all getting in line to vote yes for it. Now stop talking about Dr. Seuss and start working with us on behalf of the American workers. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields.
Mr. Speaker, one of the...
Speechless. Again, that's the reason that I'm a registered Democrat. The fact that you have someone like Tim Ryan, and I'll tell you, I hope Tim Ryan, I hope he wins in the Senate race in 2022, because it would be incredible to have him in the U.S. Senate. But this is one of those moments that we need more voices like Tim Ryan to talk about how the most prosperous working class in the history of civilization was built. And it was built, quite frankly, it was built through massive government investment, like this rescue plan. And it was built by people having the right to share in the wealth that their labor created because they were able to sit down and negotiate. And the Republicans are going to tell you this story that no, it was by people who were working really hard and pulled themselves up by their bootstraps, whittling straps out of intestinal fortitude. Yeah, kind of like, what's her name? Virginia Fox said today. She says, I heard Democrats argue that it's the unions that built the middle class. No, the unions didn't build the middle class. Entrepreneurs and individual workers in this country built the middle class. And that's what this bill does. What this bill does is take away their freedom. Nonsense. Nonsense, Virginia. Nonsense. And you know it. You look at these states that are so-called right-to-work states, all have shrinking middle classes. All have lower wages, less health care, less retirement security, less safe workplaces. It is what it is. And while this frame of, we just had entrepreneurs and hard workers, that's all it was, nonsense. Absolute nonsense. It was massive government investment and the right to join a union. And I think about my grandparents and, think about all of that greatest generation when they came back from World War II. They came back and they not only fought the fascists overseas, they fought them here. They went into workplaces and they demanded better wages, hours, conditions. And their government heavily subsidized them. Gave them low interest loans, gave them the GI Bill. Massive amounts of money went into building and propping up a prosperous working class. My grandparents, and I go back to my grandparents, when they first got married, they were homeless. Grandma got thrown out because they had to get married one of the old-fashioned reasons. Had to. Oops. And the first kid came like 6 months early. Because the old wives' tale, first one's always early. And through their work, they remained poor until my grandfather went into the military. Went into the military during World War II, came back. They were able to buy a house in a neighborhood that was much like the little Levitt towns that were going up all across the country. Heavily subsidized, good, sturdy family homes, extremely affordable. And that's where they raised their family. And that's where they spent their retirement years. And that's where they built their wealth. And they did it on one income, one union job during the years where my mother and her brother and sister were young. And then my grandmother went off and got a union job that paid really well in the retail industry. That's how they built the most prosperous working class in history. And how they, in their golden years, wanted for nothing, lived in their homes, had their savings, had their union pensions, and had Social Security, and they lived a good, decent retirement. That model we can recreate in the modern day. But it takes government investment. It takes we the people demanding much better than what we're getting. And I'll tell you, this rescue plan, this is a start of it. This is the beginning of moving towards those policies that are going to help build that most prosperous working class. This is exciting stuff. And if we can get an infrastructure bill passed through, there's no telling what we'll be able to do. There's no telling what this economy is going to look like. But the Republicans are going to vote against it and against everything because they don't want that. They know if that happens, their future is done. And that's the reason they're going to fight back constantly against it. I'm going to love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. Stick around.
There's nothing more American than workers standing up, and the union gives a voice to win. On the Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1910. That was the day miners in Westmoreland County, Pennsylvania, struck for union recognition and the 8-hour workday. They hoped to beat back deep wage cuts and out-of-pocket costs for safety equipment and explosives. As many as 15,000 miners went on strike against 65 mines. Thousands were immediately evicted from company housing. The UMWA helped to set up tent cities. Area coal companies imported immigrant strikebreakers who had little understanding of English or why they were being hired. When they tried to quit and leave company housing, coal company police beat them back to work, refusing to let them leave until they paid the cost of relocation. The situation was so bad that the House Committee on Labor held hearings as to whether workers were being forced into peonage. Injunctions were enforced against strikers picketing on public property near the mines. Many were arrested for simply traveling along public roads. Strikers were also denied access to many municipal services whose facilities were on coal company property. Hundreds of strikers were arrested for trespassing and their leaders held on charges of conspiracy and intimidation. They were routinely harassed, beaten, and fired upon by sheriff's deputies, state troops, and the coal and iron police. Over the course of the strike, more than a dozen strikers and their family members were killed at the hands of security and police forces. The strike wore on through the brutal winter of 1910-1911. Hunger and disease spread throughout the tent cities. After 15 months, the UMWA called off the strike. The union was broke from disbursement of strike funds, and many blacklisted strikers had to leave the state to find work. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So I got to tell you, I love Tim Ryan. And as I said, Tim, what he did today, that's the reason I'm a registered Democrat. Yes, I voted for Joe Biden And the reason I voted for him is everything he's been saying. But the passion that you saw out of Tim Ryan took me back to when I was a kid. Growing up in Ohio, you had John Glenn and Howard Metzenbaum with his pink tie. Oh, those were good days. Maybe. Hey, 22's around the corner. Tim Ryan could be the senator along with Sheard Brown from Ohio and bring back the good old days. And maybe we start moving forward on real progressive legislation. But today, as I said, they began debating the PRO Act. I think this is a vital piece of legislation. And here to share some thoughts on, well, what it is, how it'll work, and how we get it passed, I've asked Dan Maurer to come talk with us. Dan is the Director of Government Affairs with the Communication Workers of America, CWA. Dan, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks for having me, Rick. Glad to be here.
So let me get, when we start, let me get your thoughts on Tim Ryan. I mean, come on, that's a moment.
It was awesome, and I think that's the thing that we need to see. We've been telling people for years that for Democrats, they sometimes some folks treat labor as a side issue or a constituency, but really the labor movement is really what the core of the working class and what the movement for justice, not just for working people, but for everybody is in this country. And that was exciting to see. And not just him, you saw Ilhan Omar give a great speech. You saw lots of people. It was really exciting to see, last year when we passed it, there was some hemming and hawing. You had a bunch of Democrats vote no, and we really, I think, have seen how the momentum is shifting, and now Democrats are realizing that they can really stand up and speak out in favor of labor, which is really what we want to see.
No, because for me, this is the issue. If we're going to fix all of the other societal problems, for me, it comes back down to kitchen table economics. It comes down to people being able to put food on their table and a roof over their head. If they can't take a day off of work to participate in their democracy, it's over. There's nothing else we're going to be able to do.
That's exactly right. And, we and at CWA, we think really like our whole fixing our democracy and fixing our broken labor law are wrapped hand in hand. When you look at places that have deunionized, deindustrialized, you see folks go back to fear, and they go and can get misled and buy into this cockamamie news and everything. But when you've got a union in place who can really advocate for where workers can advocate for themselves, it allows people to make better decisions, and allows workers, more to the point, to have a voice in the whole legislative process, not just on this, but on voting issues, on health care, you name it. Everything really does better if we have a strong labor movement.
No, what I've always said is, look, the economics part of it is one thing. Making sure that workers share in the wealth that their labor creates is one thing. But the other thing that the Republicans don't want is an empowered citizenry. They don't want people like me who have always had the good fortune of being empowered on the job and then taking that into the public sphere. We want people, and I want people who are going to be passionate about voting and passionate about defending their rights, not just in the regular world, but at work as well.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And, we see this at CWA when we have some workers who our biggest sectors in the call center industry. It's traditionally a low wage industry where even though it's really complicated, really difficult job, people are often, if they don't have a union, they don't get treated fairly. And just every time someone organizes, it's amazing to see the way that they grow and they realize that they have power. It's not just that they have to listen to some buddy wearing a fancy suit and tie who has power. They have power themselves.
Yeah, let's talk about the PRO Act itself, the Protecting the Right to Organize Act. What's in it?
Yeah, this is a bill that's really a great bill because it takes you at every step of the process from when you first sign up and you sign a union card to when you go out. If you need to go out and strike to protect your health care, it helps you at every step of the way. I think, in about a third of organizing campaigns, workers are illegally fired right now. On top of that, companies can have these captive audience meetings where they just browbeat and terrify workers. And meanwhile, they can drag on elections for months and months. That's all going to go out the window, banning captive audience meetings, real penalties for companies that break the law, and quick elections. Then it makes sure you can get a first contract. We see that sometimes where workers organize and then they're stuck for years and years. Sometimes they even decertify the union, because what's the point of having a union if you don't have a contract for 6 or 7 years? And then if you need to go on strike, right now, that's real tough because, your workers can't have your back with secondary strikes, and because companies can replace you permanently if you go out on strike, and the PRO Act stops that. So when you look at this is really a comprehensive bill that's about building worker power from start to finish, so that workers, and it's not even, frankly, something that I think almost any of this should be controversial, because if you do this, if you pass this bill, all it means is that workers are going to get to make their own decisions free of being or going to make their own decisions free of intimidation by their employer. That's it.
Yep.
And that's really something that was the whole purpose of the National Labor Relations Act when it passed almost 90 years ago, but it hasn't been in practice, certainly not for the last several decades.
No, I mean, for me, the idea of this is what the Employee Free Choice Act should have been, even though we didn't get that, but this is what it should have been. But for me, the idea of just repealing Taft-Hartley and all of the horrible things that they've done since the original intent of the National Labor Relations Act, to me, that's where I want to go back to. I want to go back to a closed shop. I want to go back to the things that built that most prosperous working class in history, like my grandparents did. To me, that's where I want to. That's where I want to be. I'll take this. This is a step in the right direction, but I want to go back to the original intent of the act itself.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that this bill is going to be a magic solution, but I do think this will get us a long way there if we pass it. Now, that's obviously, we just had a huge victory a matter of minutes ago in the House, but we've still got a long way to go, and because we really, I think this is a real generational opportunity when you have someone like Chuck Schumer, who's the Senate Majority Leader, who's unequivocally 100% pro-labor. You've got, and Joe Biden, I think the most pro-labor president probably since FDR, and you've got the bill through the House already, thanks to Speaker Pelosi and Chairman Scott and their leadership. When you've got all of that done, that's a time when you can make real big reforms for working people, and so we've got to take advantage.
No, we're in this great.
Signed into law. We're
really in this great moment, Dan, where transformational things can happen. I mean, we're in an FDR kind of moment, and Joe Biden, I think, is. I was concerned. I'll be honest. I was concerned he wasn't going to meet the moment. I'm not as concerned as I was. I'm actually pretty optimistic. The $1.9 trillion rescue plan for me is transformational in thinking of policy in this country, because we're helping people who are desperate and need it, as opposed to giving it to the wealthy and hoping that they'll bail us out. For me, that's transformational. Moving on to a giant infrastructure bill would be incredible, but this PRO Act is a huge part of it. And the question that I come back to in a 50-50 Senate with Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema and those folks, how do we get this through?
Yeah, well, I will tell you, we're at a good starting point now compared to where we might have thought we would have been. We only had one Democrat vote no in the House this time, compared to 7 last time. So we're seeing some momentum pick up, and we've already got 45 co-sponsors in the Senate, which is already more than we had last time. So we're making progress. But now, I'm going to be realistic here. It's going to be real hard for us to get 10 Republican senators, much less even one Republican senator to support it. Frankly, you've got more of them supporting the National Right to Work Act than you do things that really support workers. So that means we've got to get the whole Democratic caucus on board. And it means we've got a couple options. One is, we'll use the rules we have now. Hopefully we can use budget reconciliation. I know it was terrible that the Raise the Wage Act got taken out of that rescue plan because of the budget rules, but I think we have a stronger case because of companies paying penalties to the government. But if we can't do that, what it comes back to is the filibuster, because this is I want to just be a little. I know you have concerns about the filibuster. I would be even more negative probably than you are. The filibuster has been used for basically two things throughout history. The first thing, for a long time, it's been used to deny civil rights to women, to African Americans, to immigrants, to LGBTQ people. It's been a horrible process. The other thing
think Strom Thurmond there.
Exactly. And the other thing about people like Strom Thurmond is they don't like working people to have a voice either. So it's actually been used for more than a half a century to block labor law reform. Back in 1966, there was a bill to get rid of the Taft-Hartley right to work provisions. That died. Why? Because of a filibuster. Obviously, LBJ would have signed it had it been able to pass. So it's a real question of like let's take advantage of every opportunity we have. Let's use the budget process. Let's get it in there if we can. But if we can't, we really gotta have a serious conversation, because we cannot let this moment pass because of some arcane rules.
No, I'm right there with you. And to highlight it also, you go back to the Clinton era. The only reason I voted for Bill Clinton is he said that he was going to pass a strike replacement bill, and it was filibustered by Bob Dole. Which that didn't get through. And then they just stopped. They didn't even bother to go back to it, which is generally what happens when they have these kind of filibusters. They go, oh, hey, we tried. And then they move along. For me, I've been saying for a very long time, what happened to Mr. Smith going to Washington? What happened to Strom Thurmond? Because eventually Strom shut up. He ran out of gas, whatever you want to say, and they moved along. They passed legislation. This is one of those moments where I go, this is a perfect time to go back to a talking filibuster, where if you're that against this, you take the floor and you tell us why, and you continue to tell us why for as long as you got air in your lungs, and then we vote on the bill.
Yeah, and you saw Joe Manchin saying he might be open to that over the weekend. That's really encouraging. I mean, I think just the 60 votes is just about preserving minority rule, mainly for the wealthy, right? Because with budget reconciliation, you can get things through. You can get tax cuts through with a majority vote. With fast track for trade deals, that offshore jobs, you can have 51 votes and get it done. But when it comes to things that working people care about, you have to really get very creative and very clever to get it in any of these processes. And so really we should get rid of the whole thing. But if we could at least make people talk and stand up and defend why they think companies should be able to browbeat workers and force them to come in and get intimidated, I'd like to hear them say that. If they think why should a company be able to hire scabs and just kick long time, very good employees off the job for no reason other than their union membership and the fact that they had to go out to protect their rights while they were on strike? Yeah, I'd like to hear them defend that, because we can't just let them wave it off and go into the night.
No, and I would love to hear them defend lower wages, less healthcare coverage, less retirement coverage, less safe workplaces. I would love to hear them defend all of those things. But sadly, with these arcane rules, we don't get to hear any of that. They just go, no, we're not going to vote for it. And it quietly goes away. This is one of those issues that can't just quietly go away. And I look at someone like Joe Manchin, especially on this issue, because West Virginia is a labor state. There were some bloody labor wars in their state's history. And you had someone like Jim Justice, the governor there, who recently came out and said, hey, we passed right to work and it didn't help us. We went after prevailing wage and that didn't help us. So I'm hoping there's some awakening that these bad ideas, these horrible policies aren't working, and we need to go back to what has been proven to work, and that is ensuring that people have a voice on the job.
I hope so. And I think, if anything, the last year really should have showed us that, right? Like, you look at all the people who had to go to work without PPE, who couldn't, who couldn't get sick days, who maybe if they were getting laid off or furloughed, had no control over that, and then they tried to organize, and they realized that even in a time of a deadly pandemic, something that's never happened like this in a whole century. And even then, companies are putting profits over people. No, we've got to reinvigorate the labor movement. And so I really hope people on on Capitol Hill are recognizing that. I know some of our other allies are. We've had great support in the product from the environmental community, for example, from the Sunrise Movement and all these people who are saying, you know what, if we want to really have a sustainable future, workers have to be able to have a voice.
Yep.
And that's exciting to hear them, because they work mostly on environmental issues, and they're saying, we understand workers need a voice in the job. And if everyone comes to understand that in Congress, we'll be in a much better place.
No, and it's going to come down to obviously the Senate, because it will. I think it'll pass the House, and it's going to come down to those handful of senators and making the right choices. And for me, the idea of moving to that talking filibuster is the way to go. So, last line of questioning I've got for you. Who do we pressure? Who are you identifying as the potential movables?
Well, there's 5 Democrats or independents who aren't co-sponsoring the bill, and to be frank about it, we got to get all of them, because we need all 50. So it's both the senators from Arizona, it's Senator Manchin, as you mentioned, Senator Warner from Virginia, and Senator Angus King from Maine. And so they've all got to hear from you. I think, in fact, for people, even if you're not from one of those states, your senators got to hear from you, because we need them talking internally in the caucus, saying we need folks that saying, look, people are up my ass telling me you got to pass this. So if you don't have the action item already, go to cwa.org/PROACT. That's cwa.org/PROACT. You can write your senators there, and then make sure to give them a call, burn up their phone lines, burn up their social media, all of it, because there's going to be a big corporate fight back, and we need to really have all our folks engaged.
No, this is an incredible moment. This is a moment where this is where we need people to come out of the woodwork and loudly and often contact their representatives, especially the 5 that you point out, the 2 from Arizona, Simina and Kelly, Warner from Virginia, Manchin from West Virginia, and Angus King, the independent from Maine. Dan, I appreciate the time. Great talking with you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, brother.
Good stuff, Dan Maurer. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1911. That was the day that coal miners in Westmoreland County, Pennsylvania, walked out of mines. It became known as the Slovak Strike because 70% of the strikers were Slovakian immigrants. Unrest was mounting among workers in the non-unionized coal fields. Tens of thousands of miners were signing up to be members of the United Mine Workers of America. And the union was winning improved working conditions and wages for their members, including the 8-hour day. But the Westmoreland miners were not unionized. They still had to work 10-hour days. Then the Keystone Coal Company required the miners to use new safety lights and explosives. The miners had to pay for these items out of their own pockets. Outraged, the miners met to formulate a response. 400 men joined up to a new UMWA local. The company cracked down immediately. They fired 100 men who had attended the meeting. Some were long-term employees who had worked for more than 2 decades in the mines. The miners walked off the job to protest the firings. Soon the strike spread beyond the Keystone Coal Company. Miners joined the strike from 65 mines belonging to 30 companies. The mining companies responded with every tactic in their arsenals. They evicted the miners from their company homes. They won injunctions against picketing. They recruited recent immigrants from Eastern Europe as scabs. They paid off police who responded brutally to the strikers. 16 miners were killed. Although the strikers held out for 16 months, the strike ended in defeat, with many of the strikers being blacklisted from future work in the coal fields. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So, a new report out by the New Line Institute, and not a good one. Their conclusion is that the Chinese Communist Party had the intent to destroy the Uyghur minority population, and we've seen all of these violations, all of this horrible treatment. They've now concluded that it was their intention. They were engaging in genocide. They were going to wipe these people off the face of the planet. And sadly, I don't know. I didn't hear enough coming out of the Trump administration. I'm hopeful that the Biden administration does a whole lot more than they did. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on where we are, what things are going, and maybe a couple of thoughts on this. I've asked our good friend Scott Paul to come talk with us. Scott is the president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing, AmericanManufacturing.org, their website. Scott, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, it's great to be with you.
So this report just out. Any surprise there?
Yeah, I think it confirms a lot of what we have seen being reported before. And of course, information from the western part of China that has very limited access is hard to come by. And so the more accounts that we can get and the more that's independently verified that we can get, the better. But this is clearly a genocide, and the definition of genocide, includes trying to draw down the population through forced sterilizations, through separations, in addition through killing. And this is exactly what the Chinese Communist Party is doing. And just to remind your listeners, the Uyghurs are a population of Turkic people. They are predominantly Muslim. They're the very western outreach, western portion of China. And China's assimilation policy has tried to wipe out the diversity of cultures within China since the founding of the communist state there. You think of Tibet as being the most prominent example, but the Uyghurs are another, and it's shameful. And in addition to being a human rights concern, I think that one of the challenges that we're going to face from a policy perspective, there's an overwhelming number of members of Congress, Democrats and Republicans, who want to sanction the Chinese government for this and who want to prevent any sorts of goods that may have originated or have parts from this region, which are, you have to assume, and in many cases we know, are made with forced labor. They should be barred from the American market. Overwhelmingly popular legislation, but they couldn't get across the finish line in the last Congress because multinational companies lobbied hard against it. I think that there needs to be some accountability there as well. Is that I cannot imagine any of these companies want to be identified with acts of genocide, but they're trying through the back door to prevent real consequences from happening as a result of this.
No, I'm looking at this moment. We're in this. I think as a country, we're in this weird moment. One of the things I talked about in the earlier segments is, we're in a transformational moment, and I think Joe Biden is rising to the occasion. I feared he wasn't going to be up to the moment. He's showing me that he is, and I'm looking at the Secretary of State Anthony Blinken's speech where he's talking about, we really have to change how we do things. We've got to get away from this neoliberal trade agenda. We've got to get away from deindustrialization. We've really got to turn this country around. And this is one of those things that, we talk about this and I go, this is horrible, and then nothing gets done. This is another reason we have to flip the script on this, I think.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And both you and I have discussed this before. I mean, coming in to the campaign, I think there were very tempered expectations about where Joe Biden would fall on questions with respect to trade policy or with respect to how to deal with China. He, had met with Xi Jinping, many times as vice president, had a personal relationship with him. Is not known as a very confrontational person on foreign policy or trade, especially with respect to China. But so far, the signals that he has sent and the signals that his administration has sent, and Secretary Blinken in particular, who gave a really remarkable speech last week, kind of laying out America's foreign policy agenda. And Secretary Blinken acknowledged that trade had not worked for workers, and that while it may have accomplished some foreign policy objectives, that it had left workers behind and needed a reevaluation. We needed a different trade policy, and acknowledged that it had done a lot of harm to industrial communities. And so I mean, we've both been working on these issues for a long time, and to hear kind of a national Democrat say that instead of getting a lecture, right? Instead of getting a lecture about how we don't understand it was I think very meaningful.
Yeah.
Obviously, it needs to follow up with the policy, but this is a promising start.
No, absolutely, and I can tell you stories I've had with people over the years where I'm railing on neoliberalism, and I've had people pull me aside, going, hush down. Some of our friends are neoliberals. I go, maybe they're your friends, but these are bad ideas that have put us in this moment. So I'm hoping that there's something new that comes out of this, because it's. I think we're at this moment where a lot of the bad ideas that got us into this mess, like these trade policies, like national right to work laws, like attacking prevailing wage. You look at the governor of West Virginia coming out saying, hey, we did both of those and it didn't help. I think we're at a moment, at least I hope we're at a moment, where we can turn back those bad ideas and move in a more positive direction.
Yeah, I am optimistic there. And it certainly seems like America is turning a corner. And is turning a corner from the public health perspective, but also from this having government on the side of the people perspective as well. And I will say, just with respect to China, which had been the focus of our conversation, that there were a lot of folks out there who were like, well, Trump was very tough on China. He did the tariffs and he called them names. Right? That was essentially the two planks of his China policy. To his credit, he did identify some security issues, which I think had been underserved over the last decade or two. But I think there'll be a much more coherent policy from Biden that in many ways can be more effective, and that they're going to be very sophisticated about the tools that they employ. And they've shown, both with respect to this designation of Uyghurs, this decimation of Uyghurs as being a genocide, in keeping sanctions in place on companies like Huawei, reviewing all of that certainly, but certainly not backtracking on any of this. I think Biden has shown that we do need to stand up to China. We need to get our own house in order, which is what they're starting to do first with the American Rescue Plan, and then following that on with some massive capital investments to make us more competitive, that we really can see brighter days ahead.
No, I'm right there with you. The only thing that I'll back up a little bit on is you said they're going to have a more coherent strategy and policy. I would argue the Trump administration didn't really have a policy, because Trump was one of those guys. I can make the deal. So whatever policy they may have had. There have been numerous reports that out the window with his gut feeling. So we're going to move away from Trump's gut feelings, which I think is a good thing. Now you talked about the rescue plan. I think for me, this is one of those things, transformational spending. This is that kind of moving away from the old bad ideas to where whenever we got in trouble, it was always tax cuts for the rich, always tax cuts for big business, and hoping that the benevolent employers and the philanthropic corporations would then be, good to us. Hasn't really happened. This, to me, is now giving money to the people at the bottom who need it, and going back to the FDR kind of model that built the most successful middle class in history. I think this is a great thing.
Absolutely right. I mean, the distributional tables that I've seen on who will benefit from the American Rescue Plan are phenomenal and are completely opposite of the corporate tax cuts and tax cuts for the wealthy that Trump and the Republican Congress did, I guess, about 4 years ago, a little less than 4 years ago. But but the vast majority of these benefits will go to the poor and to working class people.
Yep.
And I think that is important, and that's going to give all of us a boost. It's going to create more of a demand for our manufacturers. It's going to stabilize families that have seen dramatic amounts of income instability over the past year. And it's going to set the stage, again, I think, for a follow-on here, which is like, okay, the American Rescue Plan gets us through the end of this pandemic and helps to get people back on our feet. How do we keep people on their feet, and how do we get them ladders to platform up to the next level of wages and benefits and jobs? And from a national perspective, how do we get to that next level of equity, and how do we get to that next level of competitiveness so that we are once again economically secure? And I'm excited about the possibilities there with respect to infrastructure, innovation, clean technology, and what we can do if we put our minds to it. And I think the rescue plan shows that we can get it done. I mean, it was a big idea, and they got it done. And there was a lot of gnashing of the teeth about it, but it's going to become a law, and then move to phase two.
Yeah, no, and phase two is a really big, chunky infrastructure bill. I don't want to have any infrastructure weeks. We had all of our parties and all of our photo ops and all that stuff for the last 4 years. I just want a bill, and I want people to get to work. Ronald Reagan always used to say the best anti-poverty program is a job. I amend that to a union job. Let's get those hard hats back to work. Let's rebuild our infrastructure. And I've heard numbers up to $4 trillion investment, which we could use, judging from the American Society of Civil Engineers' latest report card that gives us a C-, not a great grade.
Right. Yeah. C- is usually not something you're proud to pull off at any level. And I think it's important because that report card, and it's interesting for folks. It's at infrastructurereportcard.org, but it's interesting to see because you can go to your state and see how well everything is doing, from the roads and bridges to your aviation infrastructure, to wastewater and clean water facilities and school construction, everything in between. It's really remarkable what these engineers have done. But it also lays out the costs of inaction and what that has meant. And basically, that C- has meant that every American household, if we keep this up, it's going to cost every American household more than $3,000 a year in basically the potential for lost wages or lost competitiveness, or we're losing market share.
Or keep fixing my car.
Yeah, absolutely. And so all of that. And so this is the estimate that the civil engineers have, is that if we invest not quite $3 trillion over 10 years, it will bring us up basically a grade. We'll be able to do our backlog of maintenance, and we'll be able to make a few investments. If we do the $4 trillion, which also includes clean technology, we'll be remaking our economy, and we'll be doing it in a dramatic way that I think will blow people away, and it will also create demand for manufactured goods. You think of all the steel, all the manufactured goods that goes into building all that infrastructure out. There's great union construction jobs, Rick, that are associated with that. It increases mobility for people to be able to get to and from work if they need to, and that's important in building up the equity goals. So there's a lot of good that we can do if we follow those recommendations. And I'm with you. We don't need a week. We need to focus on this. I see it at the highest levels of the White House. I'm optimistic, but I know we have a lot of work to do to get it across the finish line.
So how do we get this done? Because, I remember, and I guess I'm old enough to remember when infrastructure was not partisan. When everybody wanted to bring something home to their districts, if you were a congressman, there was nothing better than bringing a library or a school or a bridge or paving that road so you could go to the ribbon cuttings. How did this become partisan? How did this become this kind of thing where we just can't seem to get it done? Are you think this will get 60 votes in the Senate?
I don't know if it'll get 60 votes, and I think Democrats have left open the possibilities that they may need to do this through a second reconciliation a little later this year. I think there could be 60 votes if this is done from a purely pragmatic perspective instead of a partisan perspective. Because as you mentioned, roads and bridges, they're not blue or red. You know, we all drive on them, or we all depend on them. And these problems exist for red state governors. They exist for blue state governors. And so we can get this done. And there are more payment options. How do you pay for this than we've ever had before? I mean, we don't necessarily have to rely on a user fee or a gas tax. We may be able to roll back some of the corporate tax cuts. It sounds like Joe Manchin is certainly open to that as an opening play. We can borrow some of this. The rates are still low. They probably won't be this low again for some time. And since it's a capital improvement, this is going to have some ROI. This is going to bring money back into the federal government through the wages of those manufacturing workers, those construction workers, and all the efficiency we're going to get out of the economy. So, you know, the cost only grows if we don't do it. So I do think that the White House has a focus on this. That's going to make a big difference. And I know something can get through the House of Representatives. I'm certain something can also get through the Senate. I think the question is, you know, how big is it going to be? And when is this going to happen? But I see Biden as being very committed to getting this done.
Because we need it. I mean, the truth of the matter is this is part of the plan to rebuild our economy and to move forward and help people that need it. This is just this is another one of those things that has to get done. And I hope people will check it out. We'll get links out on how you can check out the big report card over at infrastructurereportcard.org. Also, you can check out the website at americanmanufacturing.org. Scott, I appreciate the time. As always, good stuff, my friend.
Hey, Rick, it's great to be with you as always. Keep up the great work, man.
Appreciate it. Our good friend Scott Paul, president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing. Quick break. Right back. Stick around.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. You've likely heard the recent news stories about the proposed Keystone XL pipeline. The national media continues to report as labor, energy groups, environmental, and Native American activists all debate the proposed pipeline. But did you know that on this day in labor history marked the beginning of another oil pipeline project? The year was 1974, when work began on the Trans-Alaskan pipeline system. In the early 1970s, the United States faced an energy crisis as international oil prices skyrocketed. The Alaskan Pipeline Project was started as a means to address the crisis, although many in the environmental movement protested the idea. Tens of thousands of workers flocked to Alaska. Towns along the oil line boomed overnight. The population of the town of Valdez more than quadrupled from 1,500 to more than 6,000 in just 1 year. A 2-bedroom log cabin without indoor plumbing could rent for as high as $500 a month. In Fairbanks, demand for space by workers was so high, workers had to rent bed space. In addition to the high costs, workers also had to endure the harsh cold. Todd Honer, a pipeline laborer, described the experience. When you're working at night on the North Slope, the wind is usually blowing, the snow is usually blowing, communications is marginal, and the smoke from the diesel engines, the cold, the chaos. It was surreal, and we continued that for 10, 12 hours. And I am sure by the end of every night, everybody wanted to quit and just go home. Many more workers did not even get the chance to brave the cold, as more workers arrived than there were available jobs. Those who had arrived too late to land a job had to return home disappointed, while others never made it home at all. During its construction, the Trans-Alaskan Pipeline took the lives of 32 workers. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
In February, Texas Senator Ted Cruz ran off to a luxury resort in sunny Cancun, Mexico, during the deep freeze that devastated millions of his constituents. But I wasn't mad that Ted fled. What upset me was that our government let him back into our country. Cruz is, after all, the two-legged, self-aggrandizing ego that arrogantly and illegally tried to cancel the ballots of millions of voters in last year's presidential election. Then he helped dupe a crowd of Trumpeteers into storming our nation's capital in a violent and silly attempt to seize control of our government by force. Now, the wannabe autocrat is demanding that the Supreme Court suppress the people's democratic will. He's teamed up with the sour old corporate plutocrat, Mitch McConnell, to back a ploy by Arizona Republicans to disenfranchise Latino, Indigenous American, and black voters. Cruz and McConnell demand that the court's partisan Republican justices gut America's landmark Voting Rights Act, which prohibits states from restricting the opportunity for minority voters to participate in the political process. Arizona's Republican lawmakers had passed a nasty provision declaring that any ballot cast in the wrong precinct, no matter how valid, must be tossed in the trash, rather than merely allocating it to the voter's correct precinct. This almost entirely affects people of color, for GOP election officials play nefarious games with them, such as frequently moving their voting places, often at the last minute, with little notice. Instead of pushing their party to try winning these people's votes, Ted and Mitch simply want to eliminate the voters. They've asked the court to nullify that bothersome Voting Rights Act so their party can freely lock out minority voters. This is Jim Hightower saying the greatest threat to our democracy is not a violent mob, but a legalistic coup by thugs like Ted Cruz.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to. For information, visit hightowerlowdown.org.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So could we be seeing a progressive renaissance in Wisconsin? You know, the state that gave us Robert La Follette, who served as governor and as senator, and really oversaw some major progressive reforms during his time. Also gave us Scott Walker, so the other side of that coin. But could we be seeing a rebirth of the New Deal type era? Could we be doing things for people again? I sure hope so. And I look at this American Rescue Plan, good start, but also there's a piece of legislation banging around the State House in Wisconsin, the Wisconsin Economic Justice Bill of Rights, that I think is really important. And here to share some thoughts on their piece of legislation, I've asked Kristina Shelton to come talk with us. She's a state representative in the 90th Assembly District there. Also, Francesca Hong, she represents the folks of the 76th District of Wisconsin. Ladies, thanks for taking time for me.
Thank you so much for having us, Rick.
Let's start with you first, Kristina. How'd this come about? How'd this idea of an economic bill of rights for the folks in Wisconsin come about?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having us on tonight. It's so great to be able to talk about this important project. And I also just want to say thank you to my colleague, Francesca Hong, for being my partner on this resolution and having this vision with me. Francesca and her team have become good friends of mine, and it's fantastic to be able to do good work with people that have your back. Before Fran and I were even sworn in on our first day to serve in the Wisconsin State Legislature, we were hard at work in November and in December planning and talking and really casting a vision and really trying to determine what our priorities were going to be when we hit the ground running in January. And, when we came out of the November election, there were certainly positives and things to feel good about as Democrats. But at the same time, we wanted to be really honest about what it meant to be a Democrat, where the Democratic Party was going, and being able to identify some of the issues that we thought Democrats needed to take into account as we plan for the next, 2 to 5 to 10 years. One of the things that really continued to rise to the top was the inability for Democrats to consistently speak volumes about what they are going to do for working families and working people. We felt that the messaging was inconsistent, and we were concerned that there was inconsistency around values as well. And so, a colleague of mine, a friend of mine, Professor Harvey Kay, who comes out of UWGB, and some other friends of mine, we started kicking around this idea of really leaning into the progressive history of Wisconsin, but also the progressive history of this country that we all love and we're fighting for. And what came out of that work was the Economic Justice Bill of Rights, which we see as really a set of commitments. It's a set of values. It's not just a moral imperative, it's an economic imperative. And we see it basically creating the foundation for our work, hopefully not just over the next 2 years, but moving beyond.
No, I'll tell you, I've been really thrilled what I'm seeing coming out of Democrats here this first month and a half, or almost 2 of the Biden administration, where we're talking about values and we're talking about how we're going to actually help working people, which is why I think this rescue plan that they're moving forward on is transformational. This is the first time in my life that we're going, hey, we're going to actually help the people at the bottom and not give more tax breaks and more handouts to the wealthy in the hopes that something will fall out of their pockets. So for me, this is a transformational moment. So I want to turn to you, Francesca Hong, and look at this. What is it that brought you to move forward on this Economic Justice Bill of Rights?
I echo a lot of what my colleague Kristina said, that we need consistency in messaging. We need to really re-identify what the Democrats and folks in the party want to fight for. And I think what we want to fight for are working people. And we've always had this identity, but it hasn't really been conveyed in a clear way. And really, we need a resource to be able to convey this to the multiracial, multi-ethnic party that I think we all want to see and be a part of. And so for me, I think with all of the grief, all of the loss, all of the disparities that continue to be exacerbated and that more people are seeing are actually the realities of this country and what this country has been built on, it was important that we take our response to all of these multiple crises was that of opportunity. And everyone in this country, everyone in the state of Wisconsin, every community deserves to have economic opportunity. And so the response to that and in our answer to that really is in this Economic Justice Bill of Rights, something that can really be a cornerstone to help more people see the value of being a Democrat, the value of being identified as and being a part of something that we really want to fight for. I think for a long time now, especially in the past 8 to 10 years, it's been difficult for folks in the party to really kind of go to communities and say, and when people ask them, what are you fighting for? And we should have a direct answer right away that every single Democrat holds, and then be able to use these values to and have them be, the cornerstone of what we need to use to build our society on. And I think we need to have that resource right now as we continue to build a more multiracial and multi-ethnic and multi-generational party that really embraces a lot of the diversity. And we need to be able to go into the communities with something that is concrete. And I think this Economic Justice Bill of Rights is what we need to go into these communities with.
No, and it's a great line. I talk to my conservative friends and they tell me, the reason that their Republicans are conservatives because they want smaller government, they want low taxes, and they want their God, guns, and gays. And that's they've got their points. You ask a Democrat and they're all over the place. So it's your hope, from what I'm gathering, that this is your ability to. This is how we're going to respond. Is that what I'm getting?
Exactly. I think it's about identity building, and we have so many different identities in our country right now. And I think that they can be from personal to political, social, economic. There are multiple identities that create a person, and there should be multiple identities that create a party and a society. And we're not saying that every single Democrat has to look the same and believe in the same things, but these are things that very few people can argue against,
Right.
you know? And this is, and we want to be the party that provides agency to people. And an economic justice bill of rights is what's going to provide agency for folks.
That is the hope. Kristina, when you walk through this Bill of Rights, this is pretty comprehensive. How do you narrow this down? I guess we should start with, what is in it that you think is important, and why did you put all the things in that you did?
Well, we really started with a question around what does it take to build communities and individuals that have economic security. And, typically when you think about this, you start with, jobs and the economy and labor. And so we knew we wanted to put in there commitments around a living income and livelihood, and of course, unions and collective bargaining. But when you really think about this issue from an intersectional comprehensive lens of, economic justice being the umbrella and sort of what are the institutions that provide that and lift that up, you see, things like childcare and healthcare and public education, a healthy planet, clean water, housing, transportation, criminal justice. These are pillars of rights that we all are entitled to. This isn't merit-based. There isn't a means test for who deserves a house and who doesn't deserve a house. We're coming out and saying, you deserve housing. You deserve, climate-friendly, reliable transportation, that everyone deserves a fair and equitable justice system. And oh, by the way, no matter your background, you deserve life, self-determination, and liberation. And that, everyone should be able to live free of fear. And so it was difficult. We had some tough conversations about how to get it down to 10, because we do believe in a number of rights, but narrowing it to that, the economic pillars, I think helped us to ground that conversation. And it was a challenging conversation. And honestly, it was a great first project to work with my colleague on. We really got to know each other well and to really form a great working team. Like I said, I think is going to transform into the next phase, because what the hope is that this will then lead to legislation that is grounded in our commitments here. So looking at a Wisconsin, Green New Deal, looking at comprehensive labor reform, tying in, public education and childcare to economic security. So there's a lot we think we can dig into, and we're building a great team to be able to do that.
No, it's important that you have a basis, and this is a good start, and it covers everything, from childcare to healthcare, security in general. But what do you say to the person then, Kristina, who would go, well, how are you going to deliver all this stuff? This is socialism. I get this all the time. How do you respond to that? These are going to be just a bunch of handouts, and this is going to be a socialized program?
Look, I think that, when we think about the big issues that are on our plate right now, climate change and looking at the income discrepancy, millionaires and billionaires making money hand over fist, especially during the COVID crisis, while working people struggle to put food on the table and keep a roof over their heads. And there are far few in between institutions beyond government that can step in, that can really lead with a people first vision and commitment that is not based on making money and robbing communities of, financial security, but really providing economic security. So I believe in government. I believe that government can do good work. Government is made up of people. And if government doesn't work for the people, government can be changed. And so I reject this notion that government is always problematic. We have to invest in the things that we share and in the things that we value. And I believe, based on the history of this country, that we can continue to do hard things if we believe that we actually have it within us as a country to do that. And I think what we're seeing with young people today is a rising up and saying, we demand better because we deserve better. And I think that's enough to build a future that we can believe in.
No, and for those people who say there's no difference between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, this is one of those major differences. I mean, I look at the tax cuts and job acts under Trump and this American Rescue Plan. There are very, very stark differences between the two parties, and I look at the responses that you get from conservatives now that the government's the problem, government can't do anything, we don't want any government help. To what you're saying is, government's a partner in this because it's us. If we want to do big things, we've got to do it collectively and together. And I don't think that's a difficult pitch to make.
Yeah, I mean, look, we what we see happening right now is a divestment from government and a disbelief in government because we keep saying that government can't function. So it ends up being a feedback loop. And what I keep continuing to tell people is government can work for you if you elect people that work for you. And if we have fair maps, and yes, there's other ways that we have to sort of wrap that into it, but absolutely. We have to believe that the institutions that we uphold and work in can actually serve people and not profit. And, I think that people are ready to do this. They're tired of, Democrats upholding the status quo. They're tired of us sort of speaking out of both sides of our mouth. And I'd rather do my job and be honest and stand up for working people because they've been standing up for us. I think Wisconsin is ready to go on these issues.
No, good on you. Representative Hong, I want to get your thoughts on how this is going to move through the legislative process because Wisconsin has a Republican legislature. Do you see this getting any support from across the aisle? Because this stuff seems like, it should be bipartisan, should be nonpartisan. How do you see this moving through the process?
To be honest, Rick, I don't know how it's going to move through the process. But as you mentioned before, these are all things that are very hard to say no to. It's very hard for a Republican to have to defend to his constituents why he is against safe housing. Why is he against pollution-free water? Why is he against fair and equitable justice system and self-determination? I think a lot of these things are values that are held by both parties. They just have different narratives in how they support it. And so in terms of moving this across in the legislature, I would hope that this is we continue to use this as a way to communicate with constituents, regardless of who their representative is. This is something that they deserve. And they have people in the legislature right now that are willing to fight for them to make sure that this is something that everyone can access. And I think whether or not it becomes law, it's incredibly important that this continues to be a piece of legislation that is at the forefront of setting the values and setting, is and acts as kind of a down payment and a way for leaders to be held accountable in this legislature. Whether or not it becomes law, that's really up to the speaker and those in the Senate. I would hope that one day it can reach the governor's office if it becomes a bill. But for now, I think it's incredibly important in serving as a way for people to see that there are leaders with a North Star, leaders with values, and leaders who want to fight for you, regardless of if you currently have someone who represents your interests or not.
It sounds like a great organizing tool to get people on board and to hold Republicans' feet to the fire. Last question I've got for each of you. It's the same one. What kind of response are you getting when you talk to your constituents? Let me start with you, Representative Hong. What kind of response have you gotten from people, and have you gotten any negative feedback?
So far, no negative feedback. The constituents that we have spoken with are very excited and are quite hopeful that this is a piece of legislation that they can not only identify with, but again, use as their own organizing tool to continue to get other communities and other folks that they are working with excited about. I think there is so much emotion in politics, and I actually am for that. And for us to be able to communicate that you have allies in the Capitol and we want to continue to work with you, and that advancing this type of agenda only works with an inside-outside strategy. And so the response has been incredibly positive, and we are grateful to have a very engaged district that wants to help us advance this however we can.
Yeah, at the end of the day, government decides who gets what, and deciding that people should have the right to housing and a reasonable job and health care seems to me to be almost a no-brainer. But Representative Shelton, I wanted to get your thoughts on what kind of response you have gotten, and any negative on your side?
No negative. A lot of hope, a lot of energy. When we put out the resolution, we also put out a petition asking folks to join us. Something that I wanted to mention and I forgot to is that we see this as you mentioned, Rika, as an organizing tool. And this is not just at the state level, but this is at the local and local level as well. We're calling on common councils and county boards, school boards, asking them, will you uphold these rights in the lane and in the institutions that you operate in? Calling on activist groups and community organizing groups around the state, from clean water to racial justice groups. We put out a petition asking folks to join us. So over 100 folks have already joined. the next phase of this project is going to be meeting with labor and other groups, asking for their input and asking them to join us on this fight, because we can craft legislation and be movers and shakers in the Capitol, but we also want people to know that we're going to be coming out of our office, standing with them in the streets and in the spaces that they occupy. And again, we want to show up for them just like they show up for us. So there's no telling where this is going to go, but a lot of good energy behind it.
You'll get those comfortable shoes on and get out and march in the streets. Good stuff. Representative Shelton, Representative Hong, I appreciate the time. Anything I can do to help, please let me know. I love the idea of an economic justice bill of rights. Good stuff. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having us, Rick.
Appreciate the time. And if you want to take a look at that, we'll get links out on how you can take a look at the plan. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1910. That was the day miners in Westmoreland County, Pennsylvania, struck for union recognition and the 8-hour workday. They hoped to beat back deep wage cuts and out-of-pocket costs for safety equipment and explosives. As many as 15,000 miners went on strike against 65 mines. Thousands were immediately evicted from company housing. The UMWA helped to set up tent cities. Area coal companies imported immigrant strikebreakers who had little understanding of English or why they were being hired. When they tried to quit and leave company housing, coal company police beat them back to work, refusing to let them leave until they paid the cost of relocation. The situation was so bad that the House Committee on Labor held hearings as to whether workers were being forced into peonage. Injunctions were enforced against strikers picketing on public property near the mines. Many were arrested for simply traveling along public roads. Strikers were also denied access to many municipal services whose facilities were on coal company property. Hundreds of strikers were arrested for trespassing and their leaders held on charges of conspiracy and intimidation. They were routinely harassed, beaten, and fired upon by sheriff's deputies, state troops, and the coal and iron police. Over the course of the strike, more than a dozen strikers and their family members were killed at the hands of security and police forces. The strike wore on through the brutal winter of 1910-1911. Hunger and disease spread throughout the tent cities. After 15 months, the UMWA called off the strike. The union was broke from disbursement of strike funds, and many blacklisted strikers had to leave the state to find work. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So like I said, I really like the idea of an economic bill of rights that we make sure that basic necessities are taken care of. Now, look, I think everyone should have a right to housing, a roof over their head. They don't have to sleep on the streets. That doesn't mean we're all getting mansions, because I know some of my crazier friends will go, well, you want everyone to have the same. No, that's not what I'm saying. Not saying that at all. I'm a big supporter of work. I'm a big supporter of people working hard and getting ahead and all of that stuff. But there's also this part of me that says, look, there are some who don't do as well. They're just unlucky. Things happen. Make decisions that didn't work out. And no one in the richest country in the history of civilization, and I don't think this is radical. I'd love to hear someone explain to me if I'm being radical, which is why I would love to hear Republicans actually debate something like this economic bill of rights, because I want to hear people say, no, we should let people starve on the street. We should leave people in bitter, frigid temperatures to have to sleep outside in the cold. I would love for them to say, no, If they can't afford childcare, screw them. They don't have to, just leave the kids at home. I'm waiting to hear someone make that argument. Now, when you talk to people who would in a group be against this privately, they all agree. And this is the mastery, I think, of what they're doing, is that there's none of this in here really that people are going to be against. I've always said, people should have the right to have some health security. You should have some right to old age security. You should have the right to a job that pays a reasonable wage. And if the private sector can't, or more likely won't, create enough jobs that pay a reasonable wage, we should have the public sector doing a big part of that. To me, this is not difficult. This is not a big thing. They also go into the fact that we should have a right to clean air and clean water. And water is one of these resources that, I don't know if you've been paying attention, people are still snapping up. And it's getting much more expensive. But all the other stuff that comes into this, this idea that people can believe, in worship who and what they want, that people can be who they are in the confines of their four walls. They can love who they want. Look, at the end of the day, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. It's always been my viewpoint. Now, should we have policies that are going to help people do better? Absolutely. And as I said at the beginning, I'm pretty happy with Joe Biden. And I know there are a lot of people, no, he's terrible, he's horrible, he's not my president. I think this is a transformational moment in this country. This is the first time, think about this. This is the first time that we said we're going to help people on the bottom. We're going to help the working people of this country. We're going to help 75% of the country, probably even a little bit more. We're going to put money in their pockets so they can get through this pandemic. We're going to help states and local governments to make it through this. We're going to help rebuild schools. The American Society of Civil Engineers gives our schools a D-? Some outrageous, pathetic grade. This is going to get investment into those schools and rebuild the things that we need to do. I'm actually pretty optimistic about the future and where we're going. If we can get a really big, chunky infrastructure bill, upwards of $4 trillion, we can transform this country. You get that PRO Act passed through so that workers can make a decent living with reasonable wages, with health security, with retirement security. We can transform this country. We can do what the greatest generation did. I was watching a commercial the other day, and the Army, I think it was the Army National Guard, was advertising in their commercials that we're taking the next greatest generation. And it got me thinking, this can be that kind of transformational moment. We can be in this moment the next greatest generation. We just have to step forward and move forward. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please make the argument against it. I'd love to hear it. Rick at thericksmithshow.com. Going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
Last week's OPEC decision not to raise oil production is really causing gas prices to soar.
Global oil prices are rising again, and so is the price at the pump. Interior Department moving swiftly to roll back Trump-era rollbacks. Plus,
switching away from gas to electricity is the most efficient way to eliminate carbon emissions from most buildings by 2050.
But not if cities are blocked from doing so.
Are they being blocked from doing so?
Yep.
All of those outrages and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
A crude awakening, oil prices hitting their highest level since October 2018.
And Maria Bartiromo and Fox News don't know whether to be outraged about it or delighted. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, if there's one thing I have been consistent about over the years, is that every time there is an oil spill, I always warn people, do not listen to the initial numbers that come out from the company, because they're always either lying or they're just making it up, and the numbers turn out to be way, way higher than they let on.
Oh, yes, and that is indeed true for a fossil fuel spill in a North Carolina nature preserve last August. The company that owns the aging Colonial Pipeline initially estimated the rupture spilled about 63,000 gallons of gasoline.
Oh, that's all, 63,000 gallons.
But Earther reports that the company quietly filed a new assessment. The actual spill is not 63,000 gallons, but closer to 1.2 million gallons.
Oh, there you go. Who could have guessed it?
The pipeline highlights the next big issue for American fossil fuel infrastructure: what to do about decrepit, aging pipelines as the country shifts to clean energy.
This is a huge pipeline, and it is a huge spill, but because they downplayed it when it initially happened a few months ago, nobody even knows about it.
That's right. Global oil prices are heading up again after falling to unheard of lows as coronavirus shutdowns crushed demand for fossil fuels over the last year. And that means retail gas prices and pollution are increasing as well. The rise in gas prices is due in part to fossil fuel ramping up again, and an attack on Saudi Arabian oil facilities over the weekend, and because OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, agreed last week to maintain production cuts to keep supplies low and prices high. A growing number of cities across the country are attempting to update their building codes to ban natural gas and shift to electrification to combat climate change.
That's good.
But that has just been thwarted.
Uh-oh.
Huffington Post reports that the International Code Council, a private nonprofit consortium that oversees much of the nation's building codes, voted late last week to strip local governments of their rights to set future energy efficiency codes.
Wait, what?
That after intense lobbying from construction and gas industry groups. The new system allows local officials to give input on new codes, but industry will effectively control the outcome.
So this International Code Council, they are elected by whom exactly?
It's a complicated system how they came to control establishing most of the nation's building codes. It's going to be complicated to unwind. The American Institute of Architects called their decision, quote, a step backwards for climate action. Environmental groups are calling on the Biden administration or Congress to step in and set up a new oversight body.
So this unelected oversight body makes these decisions after they get payments from the oil and gas industry. Nothing shady there at all.
Coal mining company Black Jewel has asked a bankruptcy court to allow it to shed its financial responsibility to clean up its abandoned mines.
Oh, nothing shady there either.
Black Jewel is hoping to walk away from almost 200 mining permits in 4 states, setting up a potential crisis over cleanup and reclamation. Black Jewel's bankruptcy is another sign of trouble for the coal industry and states and communities reliant on coal for jobs, and for taxpayers who may be stuck with the bill for cleanup and pensions.
Black Jewel.
But some good news. Biden's nominee to head the Interior Department, Representative Deb Haaland of New Mexico, appears headed to confirmation in the U.S. Senate, and the department itself is already moving fast. The Interior Department recently scrapped the Trump administration's controversial open science dictate that restricted the kinds of research the agency was allowed to use in making important environmental policy decisions.
The open science dictate restricted the type of science they could use.
Yes.
Got it.
And on Monday, the department tossed the Trump administration's egregious rollback of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act that gutted protections for hundreds of species of migratory birds, effectively legalizing all unintentional migratory bird deaths.
So it's a rollback?
Basically.
Okay, this is a great system. but we'll take what we can get. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So as I said earlier, I'm thrilled by the fact that, one, we got the American Rescue Plan pushed through. It's going to be signed tomorrow. That's a good thing. Also, man, Tim Ryan, good on Tim Ryan today on the House floor. And look, the Democrats as a whole coming forward and speaking out so strongly in support of the PRO Act, which, again, working people in this country desperately need that voice at work, the ability to collectively bargain for those better wages, hours, and conditions. And a part of that is getting the message out, which is why I've asked the next two guys to come talk with us about the work that they're doing. Tim Sheard is the founder and the editor of Hardball Press. They put out some really great labor literature and some material. He's also a member of the National Writers Union, UAW Local 1981. And Eric Lotke, he's an author. He's written most recently the book Union Made. Guys, thanks for taking time for me.
Thank you, Rick.
So let's start with you, Tim. I'm looking at Hardball Press, and I'm looking at some of the things like Eric's book, Union Made, and going, these are the kind of small publishers that I think authors need to get access to get their words out, to get their stuff out. What made you start this?
When I was self-publishing my novels that featured a shop steward detective in a hospital, he's based on an 1199 steward friend of mine. And as I went around to labor conferences, I ran into worker writers who were unable to place their books, fiction or nonfiction, with publishers. No one would publish.
So nobody would publish them, and I hear that. We tried to get a book of ours published a while ago, and we ended up self-publishing. And I can understand the frustration. So Eric, when you were writing your book, is that what drew you to Hardball Press?
I was also going through the same adventure of talking to mainstream publishers who said, I don't know what to do with this. It's romance. It's unions. It's not going to be interesting to regular people. And then Tim Sheard is out there with this awesome press called Hardball, and I just got in touch with him, and he said, yes, please. And
let's talk about your book a little bit, because this is an interesting time. I think there's a lot more interest in labor unions, especially with President Biden coming out and so strongly saying that people should have the right to vote today. Again, another very positive statement. What made you write this one?
People don't know as much as they should about unions. I was one of them. I grew up kind of labor skeptical, and in the beginning of my career, unions were always irrelevant or on the sidelines. And I slowly came around as I was doing political work in the criminal legal system, and you would win a fight, you'd beat a private prison, you'd beat a mandatory minimum, you'd win an election here and there. But the country kept going the wrong direction, and we'd get a win and the country would keep going the wrong direction. And then I realized, wait a minute, the thing that's missing is working people working together. That's the only thing that's going to fix it. Oh, that's what labor unions do. So I left my job. I was research director at a think tank to go be a staff researcher at SEIU to be on the ground, justice for janitors, and joined the labor movement.
No, and that is a huge campaign, but and a very successful one. One I hope we repeat again and again in these coming years. So the book, give me kind of a background. What's the book about?
It's a romance. It's a classic boy meets girl. It's a romance. We have all of the things that somebody might like about romances, but it's more interesting than that because she is a union organizer and he is an accountant on the management side of the company she's trying to organize. So they are naturally adverse. She's the organizer. He's against her, except, of course, first of all, she's fabulous. Secondly, he's pining and lonely. And thirdly, he has access to the company books So as the campaign goes on and she's making her talking points on the radio and saying the points that she's making on TV, he looks at the company books and he starts saying, maybe we could afford to give them more money. Maybe we could afford that raise that they want. And wait a minute, what's with these payments to union busting consultants to do this illegal stuff? That shouldn't be happening.
Right.
So he starts moving around to her side, but of course, it's not so easy for her.
Yeah, so basically a Romeo and Juliet story without them killing themselves at the end.
They go on a date.
Well,
after the contract is signed.
Or they get married and that is the end. No, I'm kidding. That's not where I'm at. So when you see a book like this, Tim, this clearly something that I don't know that a lot of presses would have come around to, but yours obviously did. What did you see in it?
Well, I saw a wonderful depiction of a multiracial group of workers in a department store pulling together and overcoming their differences in order to form a union. And that's the kind of struggle we want to show the world. We want to show all workers in every industry, you can do this. You can pull together and you can form a union. You can demand your rights. So I like that. And I really like the romance because this is a guy who gets in touch with the girl he loved in high school and was afraid to date. And so, a lot of us have this dream about connecting with our first great love. And so this is a beautiful love story, and the two together just work beautifully for me.
So, future people who, may want to write the next great union-made union love story, how do they get in touch with you? And how do they go about this process? Walk me through some of it.
Sure. Well, they can just go to hardballpress.com, and then there's a section, on the website about how to contact us and what we require. And I'll look at the first 10 pages in a query letter, and then we can talk about your project. I do want to say that I also have a line of children's books because I'm trying to bring labor and social justice themes to young children. And I think that's so important today to add that to their education.
No, absolutely. I mean, the only children's books that I really know about that are union friendly or union specific are like Click Clack Moo. And I know the Teamsters have a child's book as well. But, because I remember some of those as a kid. In fact, you go back to the history of the labor movement. They had numerous publications. I remember UTU, the transit union. They actually had a Cliff Merritt comic book series. Unions had those kind of publications that talked about these stories in a variety of ways, but always had that message that, unions are good.
Absolutely. And we do need to see unions sponsoring more cultural activities, whether it's poetry, music, books, chess clubs, dance. It's really important that it become a home for unions and families to get together and engage in the cultural arts.
Yeah, now, ask, for you, Eric, because I'm going back to it. I'm thinking about, how the right wing built this massive media echo chamber. If it's not, books and television, it's radio, it's all of this stuff. They invested heavily into it because they understood the power of what you do. They understand the power of the message. So what's your advice to people who want to do what you're doing and what you've done?
Well, if your book group doesn't read nonfiction, they can read Union Made. It's a story. And so storytelling is part of it, and storytelling can move people. And as you read the story, you have a good time working with the workers, working against management, trying to make things better and overcoming the obstacles that campaigners have. You have all of the good story stuff. And so you can enjoy that. And in between the lines, your friends can read and go, oh, this is what unions do. Oh, this is why we need unions. Oh, those guys aren't paid enough. Oh, what can they do about that? Oh, I see. And so we have all the lessons of unionizing, but it's storytelling, and I want you to have a good time.
It's a perfect thing. Today, in fact, my wife came to me with one of the books that she's listening to, and there's an organizing campaign going in with one of the books, and she's like, when it first started, I thought the main character was going to be this horrible anti-union person, and the message kind of turned it around. I don't know how it's ended yet because she hasn't told me, but the fact that this stuff is actually in print and people are consuming it, I think is extremely important.
Unions are coming around. I'm thinking of the Red for Ed strikes, the teacher strikes 2 years ago by now, before the coronas, when the educators were out there en masse saying to people, First of all, we need to take better care of your kids. We want to take care of your kids, but we need more money to do that. And the community responded and backed them, even as they were not going to school because they were protesting what their children needed. In a certain sense, they're still doing that, saying we need the buildings to be safe. And back then it was fewer tests and better pay. But the point is that the educators are organizing, they have unions behind them, and the community is coming around.
You're listening to the Rick Smith Show. We're here with Timothy Sheard. He is the founder and editor of Hardball Press, their website, hardballpress.com, and Eric Lotke, the author of Union Made. You can check out you can get his book by going to ericlotke.com/union-made. We'll get links out both on social media so you can figure that you can pick this stuff up and help out. But here's the thing, and this is where I think unions I'm hoping are starting to come around to telling their story, because there are a lot of very important stories that go on every day. And I tell I'm training people to work with stewards, to work with new members on bringing new members in and engaging them. And one of the things I keep telling them is you got to tell your story. You got to tell your personal story, make it relatable, because every story is important. And a lot of people are like, no, my life's boring. No, every story matters. And for me, Tim, this is why what you do is so important. We need to tell these stories.
Yeah, thank you, Rick. And I've been giving writing workshops to a number of unions, including 1199 New England, and I've helped their members write their stories, and then the union publishes them, and they've brought them to their state legislatures and to the religious leaders, and they've turned a lot of heads. They've moved a lot of people by telling their story and putting them in print.
Yeah, I mean, you go back and you read some of the, like the Steinbeck novels, The Jungle, that changed industries because people were willing to step forward and bear the shame of what was happening to them, and express how horrible things were, which again is why we need to have people who do have the ability to write them, and then obviously people to publish them. Let me ask you, Eric, because you've been around this a long time. Are you in a positive place in this moment about where you think the direction of the country is going? Because a couple of years ago, Janice gets rammed through in our Supreme Court. I'm kind of in a negative field, but I'm feeling a little bit more confident. Do you share the confidence?
I do on odd days. I start to feel better. I see that people are mobilizing. We win an election sometimes. And I like to think we're going to have good news coming out of Amazon in Alabama in a couple of days. And then even if not, there's the next one, there's the next one. And so I sort of feel like things have been getting bad for a while, and we are starting to turn the corner to make things better. And then as soon as I get optimistic, I say, shut up, go look at the newspaper. Things are really bad. Yeah. But then I go out to the streets and I talk to the other organizers and I talk to the people at the Black Lives Matter protests. And I say, okay, look, things are getting better. We are going to turn the corner.
Yeah, Tim, I'd like to get your thoughts. You're somebody who's been involved in the labor movement for quite a long time, and I think you're a little bit older than I am. You watched the decline a little bit longer than I have. Are you feeling any confidence that maybe there's an uptick? Maybe we get something like the PRO Act magically through? Curious your thoughts.
Yeah, there's definitely an uptick, and you see it also not just in traditional union organizing, but also in these laws that the states are passing, like the $15 minimum. That's a labor law. We're seeing labor rights, we're seeing immigrant rights being passed on the state level. So if we can move it to the federal level, then we'll really be in good shape.
No, it's something we absolutely have to do. Last question I've got for each of you, Eric. Any advice for aspiring writers? Because I got to tell you, I'm somebody who, I have friends who say, Rick, you got to write a book. If you're doing this kind of thing, you got to have a book. You got to be like everybody else. I just can't get it from my head to a pen. Any advice for aspiring writers?
Keep on working. Put the words on paper. Love it, hate it, come back at it the next day. Just keep on going. Find a friend to have a look at it. And in the end, tell your story.
It's all about stories, isn't it? Tim, your final thought?
Yeah, and take a class, go to a community college, take a night class on creative writing, because it really is important to get feedback from a teacher and from a group. And carry a pocket notebook with you wherever you go. And as you get a little idea, you get a piece of dialogue, you get a thought about a character, put it down and save it and collect it. And before you know it, you'll have a book.
That's what they keep telling me. I just can't seem to do it. But guys, I appreciate the time. I hope folks will check out the book, Union Made, written by Eric Lotke, published by the good folks over at Hardball Press. The website, hardballpress.com. We'll get links out on how folks can pick it up. Guys, I appreciate the time. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Rick.
Let's take a quick break right back after this. Stick around and listen to The Rick Smith Show.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1911. That was the day that coal miners in Westmoreland County, Pennsylvania, walked out of the mines. It became known as the Slovak Strike because 70% of the strikers were Slovakian immigrants. Unrest was mounting among workers in the non-unionized coal fields. Tens of thousands of miners were signing up to be members of the United Mine Workers of America. And the union was winning improved working conditions and wages for their members, including the 8-hour day. But the Westmoreland miners were not unionized. They still had to work 10-hour days. Then the Keystone Coal Company required the miners to use new safety lights and explosives. The miners had to pay for these items out of their own pockets. Outraged, the miners met to formulate a response. 400 men joined up to a new UMWA local. The company cracked down immediately. They fired 100 men who had attended the meeting. Some were long-term employees who had worked for more than 2 decades in the mines. The miners walked off the job to protest the firings. Soon, the strike spread beyond the Keystone Coal Company. Miners joined the strike from 65 mines belonging to 30 companies. The mining companies responded with every tactic in their arsenals. They evicted the miners from their company homes. They won injunctions against picketing. They recruited recent immigrants from Eastern Europe as scabs. They paid off police who responded brutally to the strikers. 16 miners were killed. Although the strikers held out for 16 months, the strike ended in defeat, with many of the strikers being blacklisted from future work in the coal fields. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
I gotta tell you, it's good to see those guys doing the work that they're doing. There aren't an awful lot of books out there that paint a positive message. There's an entire industry. Understand, there's an entire well-funded industry out there bashing unions and creating narratives that make the unions look like the bad guys. There are entire industries of setting the narrative that unions are bad. And it's one of these moments I look at where you go, the big moneyed interests are out there telling me how horrible it is. You look at this Amazon campaign, which I'm anxiously awaiting the results at the end of the month, because we'll see. Does spending $10,000 a day on union busters to come in and cause division in your workforce, does $10,000 a day for multiple people to come in and do all of these captive audience meetings and all of these harassing flyers and all of the stuff that they do during these union busting campaigns, is it going to be worth it? Or do the workers go, as my grandfather always said, if a rich guy's going to take a buck out of his pocket to tell you you don't need something, you better take 2 to get it. You better spend 2 to get it. And if Jeff Bezos, the richest man in the world, is spending money, 10 grand a day on multiple disorganizers, he understands what that means. He understands return on investment. He didn't become the richest man in the world being stupid. Now, I would argue, committed the perfect crime, bought off a bunch of politicians who didn't bother to go after him, and when they weren't taxing anything. The great tax heist, the great tax heist, but he didn't get to be wealthy being stupid, and he understands that those workers are going to want some of his wealth. They're going to want some of the wealth that their labor creates. They're going to want to negotiate over the deplorable working conditions that I've heard occur in these places. I had one person tell me that, they give you a wristband. They give you like one of those watches, like one of the smartphone things that track your every movement, track your every step, how long you go to the bathroom. If you go to the bathroom, can't do that. Production might go down, but every step, whether you take a right or a left. I mean, and we've been moving down this road for a very long time. This is not new. But the fact that they didn't have to negotiate over any of this stuff is quite remarkable. And it's one of those moments where they didn't have a choice. And for me, one of the great powers of having a union in a workplace is to be able to say, no, we got to negotiate over these working conditions. I say it all the time. When I was 20 years old, I was bench pressing, entire planets. Can't do that much anymore. I was doing just incredible amounts of work that I can't do now. I've worn things out. And I remember the old timers going, relax there, kid, because you're gonna end up making this the standard that they're gonna expect from now until you're my age. And the reality is this is what employers want. They want you to run, and then dispose of you. And this is why I think negotiating over working conditions in this Alabama plant, I think is going to be, when they win, or if they win, and I'm hoping that they do. I think that's going to be the deciding factor. The fact coming out of this pandemic that they didn't have a voice. And I talked about this the other day. Every employer goes, my door is always open. I have an open door policy. We have a suggestion box. How many people actually use it? And how many people actually get any satisfaction out of it? Very few. And I pointed that kid, I think we worked at Trader Joe's, wrote a suggestion letter. Him and another guy said, hey, we don't think you're doing enough on keeping us safe. Here are some suggestions on how we think you can help keep us safe. And they fired him. And in the termination letter, they said right flat out, your employment here is that of an at-will employee. You are no longer welcome here. And sorry, there are no laws to protect you. And I know someone, I'll sue them. No, you won't. There's nothing to sue over. He's an at-will employee, as are 90% of the workers in this country. If you do not have a contract, you do not have a contract signed, sealed, delivered, you are an at-will employee. And I tell this to people all the time. As a union member, I'm a just cause employee. You can only fire me if I do something wrong. You can only fire me if I make a mistake. And then I have an opportunity through a grievance process to lay out what happened. I have a chance to defend myself. If you're in the at-will world, the place with no contracts, with no rights, you got no chance. And that's the reality of the world that we now live in. I love to point out that every CEO in this country, they have a contract. So when Robert Nardelli was fired from Home Depot, about a decade or so ago, and got a $210 million golden parachute, they didn't give them that as a consolation prize. They gave it to him because they had to. It was part of his contract. And for me, every working person should follow the CEO and demand that they have a contract. That simple. Anyway, if you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast. The Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And as always, you can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show.